Shalom, and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk, the greatest Parsha show that was invented in Dutchess County, and now is brought to you from Highland Park, Long Island, and New York City. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet. Joining me is Rabbi Barry Chesler in Long Island and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky in New York City at the Anshe Chesed Congregation Anshe Chesed in New York City. It's great to see you guys. Shalom.
Great to be here.
Well, I just got to start off by saying the wedding was beautiful. We had such an amazing time. Mazel tov again to Gabi and Yaakov. And thank you everyone for all the beautiful wishes that came in through whatever. We put this on different platforms. So thank you all. And thank you to our loyal viewers, listeners. We've picked up a few over the last several weeks. I think we're up to 6 or 7 now.
We're enjoying it.
Come on, and you know, there's a Facebook group. I don't know. We're really delighted. We're delighted to have you here. This Parsha, Tetzei, big Parsha. In the enumeration of the mitzvot, 74 of the Torah's 613 mitzvot are located in this Parsha. That's a full 12% of the Torah's rules, the Torah's mitzvot. I always like to make the comment that this is the most mitzvah-dense Parsha in the Torah, and the little sermon that you make on mitzvah density is that you too should live a life of mitzvah density. You like that?
Man,
I like that.
Not bad, not bad. Okay, let's just go right into it. Ki tetzei lemilchama lo oivecha. This Parsha talks about going to war, situations that happen in war, and maybe just before we go into just what is the Parsha trying to do? Why is it trying to give us all these 74 laws? What is going on here? What are the questions that it's trying to answer? I'm going to turn to you, Barry, first.
thank you. I think that the obvious statement is that there's an element of comprehensiveness, that there are laws that cover all aspects of life, what we might call religious life, ethical life, business life, how we treat our neighbors, how we punish people, how we dress, all sorts of different things. And there's something for everyone here. There's so many laws here, you probably can't even count them as you go through there's so many. But on the other hand, you come across one that you say, aha, this is really interesting, or this is really great. I'm glad this is part of the Torah.
Yeah, Jeremy.
No, I would add that that the mitzvot often come and seem like they are prescribing, this is the best way to live. I think that the modern reader looks at this Parsha and a number of the mitzvot and finds some discomfort with certain features that don't reflect any number of values that we might hold with respect to treatment of gender and sexuality, for example. But I would say that this Parsha often treats laws that have to do with fixing the world's problems. It's not always the case that the Torah prescribes a law or legislates a law and says, this is the best way to live. Sometimes the Torah prescribes, confronts laws and says, we got a real problem here. The way people are behaving can be quite complicated. Let's reform the natural instincts in human beings. So for example, the very first mitzvah in the Torah, in the Parsha, is about female captives in battlefield, and well, you might have to call it battlefield rape. And the Rashi says that the Torah speaks, according to the Gemaras, Torah speaks keneged yetzer hara, that the Torah is speaking to the basest human instinct and trying to restrict it such that it does not transcend all boundaries. The Torah speaks about the execution of the rebellious son. I don't think that the Torah is saying, if your children misbehave, you should kill them. I think the Torah is saying, sometimes there are children who are out of control. Slow down. Don't kill them. Take them to the elders, and let's have a process here in which people's basest instincts, their out of control rages, can be controlled.
So what you've done here is you've basically given us a method for the study of these mitzvot. And you've basically said, look, the mitzvah says this, but when you go into depth on the context of the mitzvah, if you go into the depth about what this mitzvah is trying to answer. What kind of situation is this mitzvah relating to? Whether it be how people's moral lives decline in situations of war. The Torah has a lot to say here. The Torah is truly really trying to speak to its own context, but we, of course, being part of the conversation through generations, have extended the context to us. And yes, of course, nobody wants to take their child and be executed. But I guess every one of us has had a child say no to us when asked to do something like clean your room, or I don't think that rises to the level of Ben Sorero Moreh. However, if you inject truth serum into some parents, they would say, yes, there were times when I wanted to.
We've worked in communal lives. I have members of my congregation who, your heart goes out to them. They've had kids who are out of control.
Yeah.
They have had kids with really serious problems, and so to extrapolate from Ben Sorero Moreh in the Torah, the rebellious child in the Torah, to our own child, you've got a child who's got a drug problem or who's stealing. You know what? Calm down, and we're going to try to unpack this in a way that helps you deal with it, as opposed to just lets you overwhelm. The Psalms has the line, Psalm 119 has the line, Zemirot hayu li chukecha be'eretz megurai. Your laws were like poems to me, or songs to me, in all of my travels. I think that there's a poem or a story behind each law, and you should read the Torah, especially in all Parshiyot, but especially in this very mitzvah-dense Parsha, as you said, Elliot, with an eye towards and an ear towards the poetry. Why is it telling me this, and what is it trying to do in shaping my response? And I think in almost all cases, we'll find that these laws in this Parsha are not, just meaningless, mindless, do it because I said so, but are opening up something really to think about.
What I would add is that a lot of the laws are rooted in the shrewd observation about human nature. All of us have been in situations where we've been carried away by our passions, where our immediate response to a situation is not our reflective response to a situation. And passion does not lead to justice. Justice requires reflection. So as you said, Jeremy, we have to slow things down and get to that moment of reflection so that we could achieve justice. We could only imagine the horror of this Ben Sorero Moreh in real life, but it seems clear that the Torah's little passage here makes sure that whatever becomes of this child, it's rooted in a judicial procedure. It's not the parents taking the matters into their own hands and getting rid of their problem immediately. It's a slow process.
We could pick up on that, and I think both of you, have highlighted this, that the idea that you take the child to Ziknei Iro, to the elders, to me, that's the story here. I mean, if we were interpreting this, we're saying that there's been a breakdown. The parents can't handle it on their own. The parents are going crazy. Here they have this child that is out of control. They need help. They need support. Who do you go to in biblical society? Who are you going to go to when you have nowhere else to go, and when you need to mitigate a situation, and when your own family structure is not intact? It doesn't say go to your grandparents, go to your great-grandparents, or go to your uncle. It says go to Ziknei Iro. There's an assumption here that these people are wise. They're compassionate, they're patient, and they're going to help mitigate a situation. And that's a story that is. I think this is, we all subscribe to the idea that this incident, the rebellious child, is a theoretical case. It probably has to do with the violation of the fifth commandment. But even in theoretical cases, and it's about the understanding of these situations that delights us, and that shapes the way we understand it. And of course, there is a reward for study with the phrase for studying these passages.
Drosh v'kabel sachar. Expound even all this difficult stuff, even the stuff that is theoretical, and there is reward to be had in engaging with the Torah on these points. And I think that's absolutely true.
So I would add a nice wordplay prompted by your comment, Elliot, that a lot of these laws want to turn passion into compassion.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Okay. You know, we would be remiss if we did not discuss a couple of things in this parsha. I'm looking for the passage on Hashevat Avedah. The mitzvah Hashevat Avedah, which is chapter 22. Lo tireh et shor achicha od seod nidachim. Don't look away if you see your fellow's ox or his sheep wandering. V'italamta mehem. And that word v'italamta means, you know, you just don't care, right? Hashev teshivem lachicha. Barry, Jeremy, how many summers have we worked on this curriculum, Hashevat Avedah? I have so many fond recollections of.
Well, we've lost track, which fits in with the theme.
So many beautiful recollections of doing the lost and found game and studying these, you know, mishnayot and pieces of text and Talmud based on, you know, simanim and what do you announce, what do you not announce, and all that. And again, this, you know, what we tried to do in that circumstance is create events, create opportunities for the children to relate to these mitzvot in ways that were very real to them. After all, what could be more real at camp than losing something, or having someone take something, or having someone find something and saying, it's mine. No, it's not. It's mine, right? Having recollections of these things.
For any of you parents who send your kids to Camp Ramah and are mystified when they don't come back with any of their clothing.
Right.
We're going to lift the curtain a little bit and let you know that it's just a complete bardak. It's an utter mess.
We learned what, you know, disposable underwear is. Disposable. Going to Target before camp and then knowing that nothing will come back, and it just, you know, you might as well forget about it. You know, that's exactly what it is.
Oh, socks. What has happened to socks? You're pointing out, Elliot. First of all, this is a great curriculum for the kids in you know, 4th and 5th and 6th grades, because everybody gets what it means.
Exactly.
That we want to respect your property, and it hurts if somebody takes your property. You know, hey, mamon chavercha chaviv alecha keshelcha. You should care as much about other people's property as you care about your own. Is the great line from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who said, you know, the world, everybody cares about their own souls and their neighbor's property. The truly righteous person cares about everybody cares about their neighbor's souls and their own property. The truly righteous person cares about their own soul and their neighbor's property.
And so if I may just add to this, which is in the slight, you know, more sharper way, which is what we're seeing now, where people, you know, where there's lots of looting going on, or has been going on, and breaking of property and damage, is that the safeguards of these principles are not there, and that when our society itself ceases to recognize these boundaries and this kind of basic element of respect. I mean, here the Torah has something to teach us, even in the matter of lost objects. It doesn't, I mean, obviously there are laws for looting and stealing, etc., and damaging, but it's all in the same continuum.
You are responsible for maintaining somebody else's monetary well-being and material well-being, and you are, you know, nobody is more vulnerable than lost objects. You know, well, some you can be more vulnerable than that, certainly, but it is a particular kind of vulnerability when people exploit your property. And so the Torah is attempting to make everybody feel lo tuchal hitalem. You can't ignore this. By the way, I saw an amazing video in the course. There was in one of the unrest moments. This happened to be in Santa Monica, California. So an amazing video in the course of these last months, that there was a really wild looting situation, and this young woman, she was just like dressed in very light clothing, you know, just shorts and a t-shirt and whatever. And these guys dressed in masks and big, they were taking shovels or sledgehammers and breaking into a store. She stood in front of them to stop them from breaking into a store. Ultimately, she was overcome and, you know, physically carried away. But it was an amazing video of real human bravery to try to protect people's property from, this is a person who was protesting along with, protesting racial injustice along with the other folks, but to stand in front of the store, there was a sporting goods store, something like that, to protect the property, I thought was amazingly brave.
So that's in a sense, the Torah wants to cultivate that ethical sensibility in us. And that was obviously the purpose in our teaching children these laws. The laws themselves, they make for good stories. And of course, we all live, personal vignettes through lost objects. But to cultivate the idea that when you see something, say something, when you see something that's lost, you assume certain things, and that there's a whole way of doing a triage on an object that actually brings you closer to your fellow human beings in your community. Let's turn to another often quoted mitzvah in this parsha. Ki yikare kan tzipor lefanecha. If you see a bird's nest before you, either in a tree or on the ground, and you see the chicks or the eggs, and the mother is hovering over the chicks, or on the eggs. Do not take the mother with the children. You have to send her out, send her forth. So that'll be good for you, and you'll have length of days. So this is an interesting mitzvah. And let me ask you to offer any reflections on this mitzvah in terms of what it's talking about, and in terms of the idea, what is it trying to cultivate in a human being, and anything else that you want to relate to on this mitzvah. Barry, you want to try that?
So the mitzvah is often paired with the fifth commandment, you shall honor your parents, because that too comes with the promise of the land, and is associated with the story of the I guess infamous sage Elisha ben Abuya, known in rabbinic literature as Acher the Other, because he left the Jewish community. So he is said to have observed a boy being told by his father to climb a tree to chase away the mother so that they could take the eggs or the fledglings, and the boy falls to his death. And in the case of Elisha, he shouts, "Let in the let dayan," there's neither justice nor a judge, because the two commandments that the boy was observing both promised long life, and he came to a short life. And I think that the story itself is interesting on a number of different levels, but to tie it back in with what seems to be the plain meaning of the law itself is that we know that as human beings, since the time of Noah, we're permitted to eat meat, but there are limits to what we can do. And again, we all have lusts and passions, and sometimes we're carried away. And there's something, it seems to be unseemly, about taking a mother and its young at the same time. A lot of the medieval commentators pair this with other laws in Vayikra. You're not allowed to slaughter an ox or a cow and its offspring on the same day. And there's a humanitarian impulse behind a lot of these laws, according to, again, many of our sages, because what makes us human is not just how we treat other human beings, but how we treat animals as well.
It's fascinating. The experience with animals is somewhat less and less in our society, even though many people obviously own pets and the like. But if you go just a little bit of nature, if you go for walks or you experience nature in any kind of way, you'll come across many wildlife. And on one of my walks, we have a lot of Canadian geese in our area. And in one particular season, I believe it's in the spring, all the eggs begin to hatch. And when you're walking and you see a whole train of these chicks, the mother is fiercely protective of the little efrochim, the little chicks. You do not want to mess with that mother. And the same as we have a lot of deer in Highland Park, and my backyard is a good backyard for deer. They love hanging out in my backyard. And occasionally I'll see a mother with a little foal and little deer, and if you go near, you'll hear about it. It's the instinct that you're reacting to, and the Torah is sensitive to this, is understand it, and wants to cultivate a human being to be a compassionate human being. Okay. How about the ma'akeh, the railing around your roof? Anything you want to say about that? Ki tivneh bayit chadash v'asita ma'akeh lagagecha. That you should always take precautions to do the common sense things, right? Make sure your poisonous soaps and powders are far away from people. Do common sense protective things. Any mitzvot that you want to bring to the Parsha cast?
Well, so you know we've been talking about for the bird's nest. I also feel as Barry said that I resonate with those commentators, like most especially the Ramban, who says this is about teaching ourselves kindness and not cruelty. The cruel thing, Ramban says, listen, for the reasons that Elliot said, parent animals feel about their children the way human animals feel about their children, and it would be cruel to subject the mother to feeling to having that pain. Although one might, of course, say that the least cruel thing of all would be to be a vegetarian, but that's another matter altogether. There's another mitzvah in the Torah, and there's a sort of a paired human and animal mitzvah. The mitzvah of lo tachson shor b'disho. You cannot muzzle an ox while it is threshing. That is to say, what they used to do, what pre-modern agricultural society would do, is to thresh, to separate the wheat from the hay and the straw, is that they would just have oxen like march on the plants, and it would knock off the bad parts, and it would separate the bad parts from the good parts. They could gather up all of the stuff that they were going to make into flour. But it was seen to be cruel to muzzle the ox while it was doing this work, because that is ox yummies, okay? The ox yummies are the straw. And so to make the ox work for you while you don't let the ox eat is just cruel. And the parallel human mitzvah in the same parsha is that when people are working in fields, when laborers are working in fields, actually the rabbis understand it, the mitzvah is referring to laborers, although the simple words of the Torah just refer to somebody entering another person's field, perhaps walking through it, or maybe walking through it on the way to their own field, or walking through it on the way to town. That it's just cruel in the laborer case, or even just the regular person case, to not let them pick some of the fruit off the trees. If my job was to harvest grapes, you can't say, but don't eat even one single grape. What the worker cannot do, like the ox that is threshing, the worker can take a bite. They can take an apple. They can have, what they can't do is bring a basket, and they can't take the apples or the grapes home with them. But while working, you can eat, because the experience of being amidst all that food, amidst all that abundance, is like a blessed experience. So don't destroy it for a person or for an animal by not letting them eat.
Right. It seems excessive to make these rules, over what is a natural human tendency. There's a bunch of laws here. There's a group of laws that relate to the neighboring countries. Right? You should not permit an Ammonite or a Moabite in your community, in your people, even to the 10th generation. We'll talk about that in a second. And then it says, Lo teta'ev adomi ki achichahu. Do not despise, do not disparage the Edomite. Lo teta'ev mitzri. Do not do the same to the Egyptian. I want you to reflect on this. We recall, of course, that Moab, Ammon, and Edom are neighboring peoples and their relatives, their distant cousins. The Mitzrayim, we had some experience there. What is the Torah trying to tell us there?
the people who can't come in, our Parsha says, you can't, the mamzer, lo yavo mamzer, kal Adonai, bikal Adonai, the mamzer, which the word mamzer, of course, comes to mean in halacha, somebody born of a forbidden relationship, an incestual or an adulterous relationship. But it's not clear what the word itself means. It may mean me'amzar, from a foreign people, just etymologically, and appears to be an anti-intermarriage mitzvah or something like that. The Moavi and the Ammoni Moavi, they're just like enemy peoples, and this is a great piece of rabbinics. We also know the most famous Moabite of all is Ruth. Ruth, let's hear it for Ruth. She's the grandmother or great-grandmother of King David.
Right, but the rabbis say the law is about the Moabite man.
This is it. She is portrayed as coming into the Beit Midrash with the brilliance of Moavi velo Moaviyah. It applies to the male, but not the female. And the rabbis, in this little bit of rabbinic wordplay, say, "Oh, brilliant! Yes, okay." So Ruth can come, but as Elliot was saying, I do think the most interesting one is the Egyptian. They were terrible. They threw you in the river. They were just the worst. They were stricken with plagues for how bad they were. But you are not allowed to hate them because, in addition to the period of oppression, they welcomed you in the midst of a famine. And I think you're supposed to maintain some gratitude for stage 1 of life in Egypt and not let stage 2 of life in Egypt blot out that bit of gratitude.
So how would you categorize this in the context of people from, let's say, countries where Jews were horribly disparaged? You have the whole Jews of Arab lands experience, and of course, Jews in Germany and Eastern Europe. We lived there for 1,000 years. We thrived. And there is a very ambiguous, difficult relationship that we have with all of these countries.
With Germany, I mean, it's really, really hard because obviously there's never been anything like the Showa, as much as we've experienced hard times over the centuries. There's never been anything like the Showa. And when I hear German language, I have a negative reaction. And the state of Israel never would have survived if it weren't for German war reparations.
And one of the largest Israeli diaspora communities is in Germany, and a significant Jewish community exists now in Germany with Russian, ex-Russians, etc. So there's this relationship here with these kinds of places. Indeed, I would say, I did 1 visit or 2 visits to Poland. That's where some of my ancestors come from, and I can understand that the reason why they reflected so romantically about their childhoods and how much they loved the landscape was because their lives as they perceived it in their nostalgia was, they were very, very simple. And there was something that they all learned from there. And Jewish life and Jewish civilization thrived in these places. And we still have, I think, a very complicated relationship with places like that. Gary, any mitzvot you want to put on the table for us as we wind down here?
Well, there's levirate marriage, one of my favorites, where the husband of a childless couple dies and the widow is obligated to marry the brother-in-law. Yeah. And the way that the Torah casts it is that this is in order to preserve the deceased brother's name. That the child that will come forth from their union will be reckoned as the dead brother's son, and therefore the name will be continued. And what strikes me about the law is that it seems related in some way to the stories of Beno Tzlofchad, because I think an undercurrent, it has to do with inheritance law and what happens to the property, the land, and keeping it in the family. If the woman marries the brother-in-law, then any land that she might have inherited from her dead husband is going to remain within the family. And that's, I think, an important consideration. It's hard to make sense of the law today. Although I remember my mother telling me my grandfather, Alav Shalom, his brother, the one whom I'm named for, died childless, and my grandfather in his 80s had to do chalitza, which was the rabbinic the release ceremony. And my grandfather was a rabbi, and he found it thoroughly distasteful, as my mother told the story. So it's a curious kind of a law, and I don't know if we study what kind of reward we get from it, but I do like to think of it from time to time.
You know, I feel it's like two elements. I mean, I think there's poetry in every one of these things, and the feeling that the Torah seems to express that I do not think that the one and only way to live life is through your children. I think that that's a bit of certainly an exaggeration. I know lots of wonderful people who don't have children, and it's not divine punishment or anything, and they live rich lives. But the Torah does seem to think that there's just something wrong if a person can't contribute to have another generation. And so that poor dead childless person, he is protected by the brother-in-law, sister-in-law marriage, because, as you said, the child will go on Carrie's name. The family property is protected. But the other part of it that I think bears mentioning is that a childless widow, oh man, she's in trouble. Yeah. She's got no prospects for her own sustenance. She doesn't have children who will provide for her, and she doesn't have a husband who will provide for her, and she's probably not an attractive marriage prospect herself. So by demanding that the brother-in-law take her in as wife is also in a huge way supporting the woman. Now, of course, we think, or I think, it's monumentally creepy to enter into a sexual relationship with your former brother-in-law, but I think that the Torah is considering this as a great act of chesed towards this otherwise indigent or could be indigent woman.
Well, the Parsha ends also with the passage about amalek, remembrance. It's a passage that we read, of course, on a special Shabbat before Purim, and that does kind of put a very somber note to end with. And the idea of memory, the idea that we have to live with the memory of past experiences, I think that's very important. And maybe just a note of comfort about that comes from the Haftarah. The Haftarah this week, which is, I guess, the fifth of the Haftarot of comfort. B'shetzev ketzef histarti panecha. I hid my face from you, and b'chesed olamim, I'll take you back with love. The idea that God sometimes hides from us, and but that hiddenness is an instant. I think that's a very profound idea that animates a lot of Jewish thinking, that we have the capacity to find God's presence revealed to us in different ways. And certainly, I would say, it's revealed to us in the study of Torah, which we enjoy and delight in. We hope that we could share this delight with our many, many viewers and listeners. It's always a pleasure. It's great to come to the conclusion here and to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. Rabbi Barry Chesler, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski, and we'll see you on a next edition of Parsha Talk. Shabbat Shalom.